name is Jennifer Coyle, and I am with NTAC. And I'm honored to have Dr. Jim Martin today to walk us through Transition 101. Jim and I have been colleagues for many, many years, so this is awesome to have him here with us today. We are recording the webinar, so it will also be available on NTAC's website. Probably in about a week or so, we're going to caption it and then get it ready for that. If you have any questions, please drop them into the chat. Other than that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Martin. Thank you all for being here today.
Thanks, Jennifer, and hello, everyone in Transition Land. As Jennifer said, my name is Jim Martin, and it's great to be with all of you here today. Let me get everything working here. So what we're going to cover today is we're first going to look at what transition is. We'll look at it legally, we'll look at it programmatically, and then in my kind of unique way of looking at transition, I've taken it and broken it into 8 big steps, kind of the essential 8 big steps that we really have to do, and then we'll end it by taking home. The idea with this is that we do this, give essential information to help new personnel and team members be prepared to understand the essence of what transition is. So buckle your seatbelts, because here we go. But I think all good teachers love quizzes, so we're going to begin this with a quiz today. And what I want you to do is to write your answers in the chat box. And these are questions that will basically kind of set up today. And they kind of give the foundation for the essential parts of understanding transition. It's only a couple questions. So here we go. So the first question is, what is the purpose of special education as defined by the federal special education law? The purpose, I'll give you a hint. It's in the very first paragraph of idea in the last sentence. So go ahead and write your answers into the chat box, please. Oh, Jennifer, I should have put on the Jeopardy song. My goodness, I forgot about that. That would have been a good addition here. So we've got a couple answers that are getting close. It's kind of like horseshoes that are leaning up against the pole, but not exactly 2 points yet. You know, free appropriate education for children with disabilities, to prepare. Well, a couple people hit the nail, absolutely, because the purpose of special education, as stated in the first paragraph idea, is this. It's a free appropriate public education, as many of you mentioned it, that is designed to meet students' unique needs to, and this is where the emphasis on transition comes from, to prepare students for further education, employment, and independent living. So if you've ever wondered where the focus on post-secondary goals come from, that's written into IDEA, now you know where it's at. It's written right there in the first paragraph idea, because idea tells us that no matter where someone is in the school system that has an identified disability, we need to prepare them for life after high school. 3rd grade, 5th grade, 8th grade, senior in high school, the focus is the same, to get them ready for life after high school. And then according to IDEA, we have a unique specific focus as students become older. Okay, second question. What percent of states and territories, like Puerto Rico, for instance, what percent of states and territories require transition planning to begin earlier than the federal transition age of 16? Somebody said 20, someone said 80, someone said all, 50, 50, 50, 50%. 16 states do. 100%, I wish it was 100%. 25%. Well, you know, it used to be, back historically with IDEA, it used to be the transition age once upon a time was 14. But then reauthorizations of IDEA rolled around and the federal age got increased to 16. However, many states have now decided that the younger transition age is better because they realize that when transition education starts earlier, we have better outcomes. And there's been 2 studies I know of now that have found that for states that have that start transition planning earlier, they have better outcomes. So it's 52% of states and territories now require transition planning to begin before the age of 16, 52% of the states and territories. And many of these begin at age 14. Some at 15, some the first year in high school. But there's one state that even begins earlier than 13. Anybody know what that state is? New York? Well, not that I know of. Iowa? No, I think Iowa's 14 if I remember right. One state, according to what we were able to find out about a year ago, and it was South Carolina, begins at 13. So here we go. So what we're going to do now is look at transition conceptually and legally. The first part of this is let's take a quick trip back in history so that you can see that transition wasn't something that was just discovered overnight. It built on work that was done in vocational education, in career education, even before that. But in the early 80s, the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Special Ed and Rehab Services, the secretary at that time, in the early 80s, created this bridge model to bridge the movement of students from high school to employment. Underlying this, the context of this was several state and regional follow-up studies had been done of looking at what was happening to students when they left school. And lo and behold, they were finding out, policymakers were finding out that many of these students just weren't doing they were having problems. They were underemployed or unemployed. Very few went into higher education. And so Will, at that time, who was the Secretary of Education, basically said, you know, we have to begin to do something to improve outcomes for students with disabilities. So she said, let's come up with these bridges to help students get to employment. Some students won't need any special services. Some will always need services. Those are the ongoing services. And some will need time-limited services, just for a while to get started, to find a job, to get some support in college or at trade school or career tech, wherever they go to. And then they can move over to employment. Shortly after that idea was being disseminated, Andy Halpern came up with this model, also in the early 80s, that ended up getting published in 85. And he said, wait a minute. Employment's important. Matter of fact, you can see from his diagram, employment is the further out. It's the foremost one. It's in the foreground. But there's also other pieces that we have to focus on to enable a person to have a whole life when they leave high school. It's their social and interpersonal networks. It's the residential environment. And then all of those, we have to work on community adjustment using those services, the generic services that everyone gets, time-limited services, and ongoing services. And so this is the model that IDEA, the federal special education laws, pretty much picked up, tweaked the language a bit, and put into law. So as it became codified in federal law and then regulations and then ultimate court decisions, this is the model that really helped along a lot with that. So we have the model of what it's going to do. And then, so what are we going to do within that model? Paula Kohler, and then later Paula and many of her colleagues, including Jennifer, came up with taxonomy for transition programming. And they looked across environments as we're helping students to be prepared for transition in high school and hopefully in middle school as well. There are 5 major components that the schools need to focus in on to really help students prepare for transition. Family engagement. We know the more family are engaged in transition planning, the better the outcomes. The program structure. What is the transition education program going to look like in school? Is it only for students with the most significant disabilities? Is it just sending students off to a career technology classroom? Or what is that program structure? Finally, interagency collaboration, working with other agencies, whether it's folk rehab or the developmental disability system and many of the others that our students interact with. Student development, this is a big one, especially for teachers, because this is the area of where we teach students needed skills. And within that set of needed skills, as we talk about in a little bit, some of those skills we found out are critical. Not all skills we teach students are equal in their importance. There are some skills that when generalized to other settings and other circumstances will enable students to be a lot more successful than they would be otherwise. And finally, the last last component is student-focused planning. Our planning has to keep the student in mind and as much as possible, engage the student actively in that process. Teach the student the transition planning process and do what we can to help them become involved in that process. So now what INTACT has done over the last several years is put together evidence-based practices and evidence-based programs that support these functions of Kohler's taxonomy. So now we know what works in all of those to help achieve that. And we'll be talking briefly about 8 big ideas to help implement transition planning in the most effective and succinct way in schools. So we went from the theoretical models, that idea, of course there's other models too. We could spend a whole webinar just on the transition models, but they came down, IDEA took the best of those models, incorporated them into the law, and then Kohler came out with the conceptualization of what the programming looks like. And so now we have the structure, we have the programming that goes into that. But what does that all look like? So to start with, the IDEA 2004 says that transition planning has to begin no later than the first IEP to be in effect when the child turns 16, and then updated annually after that. But as we already talked about, the transition age has been lowered, and now over half the states and territories begin transition planning before the age of 16, and many of them say that we have to start at age 14. And I would argue that the more support needs that students have, transition planning should even begin earlier to help ensure that students get on post-high school waiting list and some financial issues that need to be dealt with and other things. So at least by the age of 14 seems to be a consensus that that's a good time to begin transition planning at a minimum. More on that later. So IDEA 2004 also gives us specific instructions for what we have to do with transition, and that we have to write appropriate goals based on age-appropriate transition assessments related to what students are going to do when they're out of high school. And if there's one thing the last reauthorization of IDEA did that really helped put transition planning and programming on the map, it's the phrase that we have to base things upon age-appropriate transition assessment, because that really identifies the strengths and needs of students And from that, we come up with our specific annual transition goals and the post-secondary goals. And then based upon a child's needs, take into account kids' interest, preferences, and their strengths. So transition assessment, as I mentioned, help make transition planning a reality. And it just plugged that last puzzle piece in that we really needed to give some structure and some firm beginnings to transition planning. We'll go more about transition assessment later. So IDEA describes transition services as basically these things: instructions we deliver to students, related services they receive, OT, PT, rehab services, and so on, community experiences they have at the job and community leisure, recreation, visits to colleges, visits to trade schools, visits to supported employment programs, whatever those might be, development of employment and other post-school goals and objectives, and when appropriate, the law says, when appropriate, acquisition of daily living skills and functional vocational evaluation. So that's in essence what the law describes the transition services are that we need to deliver. Post-school outcomes is a major focus of what we're preparing students to do. And transition services promote the movement of our students from middle school, high school, into what they do after high school, into employment, into independent living, into further education. And as you can see, the IDEA tells us so that we need to prepare students for a variety of sources, including career tech, adult services, independent, and to participate in their community. So it's wrapping up what our students will be doing when they're out of school into a package so that students and their families can help conceptualize what those are, what their adult life is going to look like when they're out of high school, and can start taking steps to make that life really happen. Indicator 13 is a checklist that Intact has developed to comply with. IDEA has several indicators, and one of them, indicator 13, checks specifically on how well of students, IEPs, the district, the state complies with IDEA transition requirements. Basically, it operationalizes all the requirements, and then we can go in and measure how well this student's transition process complies with the IDEA requirements. And on the INTAC Indicator 13 form, if you haven't seen it, go to the INTAC website to look it up. But you have to answer yes on each item to be in compliance. So the feds are serious about this, that we need to put together strong programs. And I've seen one study, hopefully there's more now, but I've seen one study that has, well, a couple now actually, that have found that as districts comply with Indicator 13 requirements, their students have better post-school outcomes. So it makes sense. We have some evidence to suggest that these items that IDEA requires really do make a difference when students are out of high school. So with that as the broad introduction of what transition is, conceptually to what I think are the essence of the ideas, to me it comes down to 8 big transition ideas. So we're going to cover all 8 of those within the time that we have left. So big idea number 1. Big idea number 1 is transition assessment. IDEA tells us that we have to include post-secondary and annual transition goals based on students' needs, their interests, and their strengths. And so when we do that, we have to consider the results of transition assessments, because the results of transition assessments will give us information to, we'll come up with strengths, with needs, with interests, and based on those and what other IEP team members have to say and what the student has to say as much as possible, we develop the post-secondary and annual goals based upon those results. And ideally, as you put together your IEP document, you'll identify the transition needs, and then over here will be your annual transition goals, and there should be a direct one-to-one correspondence between the identified transition needs, which are mediated, of course, by students' interest and their strengths, with their annual transition goal. And then the interest, of course, will feed into what the post-secondary goals are. And the more I do this, the more firmly I believe that the key to good transition programming, it's the annual transition goals, because those are the things that we can teach right now to students. And if we focus on those skills carefully, we can help students learn some generalizable skills that they'll be able to apply across any environment where they end up at. So transition assessments. The courts now, we've been doing this long enough that through the due process system, some of these issues have now been examined by federal district courts. In an interesting article that came out a couple years ago, Prince and colleagues examined district court findings that had to do with transition assessment. And what they found, and at the end of the article, they come up with a whole series, a summary of course, and recommendations. And the recommendations from the court documents have basically said just what IDEA said. It's kind of reiterated, but then took a little further too, is that we have to use multiple assessments across multiple transition domains. So the law says assessments with the big S, and the courts are saying we have to use multiple transition assessments. And S means more than one. And the district courts are saying we just can't use informal assessments. Informal assessments are those that maybe you made or that you downloaded somewhere from the internet, or that a colleague gave you that they copied off from somewhere else. These are basically assessments. Not that they're bad or good, but the district courts are saying at least one of the assessments in our assessment battery has to be a formal assessment. And a formal assessment is one simply that means it has ample validity and reliability information to support its findings. It's not like an IQ test where it has to be done under standardized conditions where you have 5 minutes for this answer and 2 minutes for this answer and so forth. But it's more of how well the test was made and evidence that the test really does what it's supposed to do. And the courts are saying we have to maximize student participation in the transition planning process. So not only does the student need to be there, but they have to be there with the knowledge of what to do, and we expect them to do things, and they have the skills and training and practice to do these things at their meetings. More on that later. So to give you an example of some transition assessments that have ample validity evidence there's several great self-determination assessments that are out there. The AIR, the ARC, the Choice Maker. There's another online one that has a lot of supporting self-determination called the self-determination assessment. Adaptive behavior scales like the Vineland. There are some interest inventories. ONET, which is ultimately sponsored by the Department of Labor, is a good one for students who have the skills to complete that. Self-directed search is a great paper pencil one. And then there's specific skill assessments that blend different things together. It's a self-determined, like the one I'm going to talk about here now. It's a self-determination assessment, but it also looks at other critical skills that research has found to be predictive of post-school success for employment or further education. And that one, which we'll cover in a little bit, is the transition assessment and goal generator. So those are some, so you can use one or more of these, and there's others too. And then you can also use informal assessments, but the law is telling us we need to use at least one formal assessment. Case law, there's several case law decisions that are coming out. Here's one that said that the school has to focus on meaningful non-academic goals to prepare students for post-school life, not just only on academic goals, but also on meaningful non-academic goals. So the TAG is one that we mentioned easier. It's an online assessment. It has ample validity evidence. And what's cool about it is that it yields priority ranked recommended annual transition goals. It gives you an overall strength and needs profile. It's a normed assessment, has just gobs of validity evidence to support it. And you can go to that website. It was one that I was involved in working on. Of course, I'm kind of biased, but I really do like it. And it's used now all across the country as an example of a test. So more about the TAG. So the TAG, the constructs from the TAG are derived from the research literature, and all the items on the TAG have been found to predict or be associated with better post-school employment or further education outcomes. And it covers these constructs: student involvement in the IEP, disability awareness, goal setting and attainment, employment, and so forth. So the TAG assessment, it's online. Students can click the audio button, it will read it to them. If someone needs ASL, they can click the ASL button, the video will pop up, and a person will come on and sign it. I am told the person signs with the northern accent, which I didn't even know was possible, but that's what that person does. And you can see the answers are yes or no. This is the screenshot of the professional version. There's 3 versions of the TAG assessment: the student version, the family version, the professional version. Each of those are completed and truth is revealed between all of them. So this is the screenshot of the professional version. The student version, easier read questions, less, it's not a 5-point scale, but it's a smaller scale, still yes or no questions. When you look at the results profile, we get a combined graphic norm reference profile. This is the strength and limitations, screenshot of that result, what the student thinks, what the parent thinks, what the professional thinks, and where those results fall within the norm group, the national norm group that this was built on. It will also give us areas of greatest strength from each person's perspective, the areas of relative strength, areas of greatest needs, and areas of relative needs. The recommended annual transition goals are based on the areas of greatest needs, but team members may also want to consider the areas of relative needs to select needs to also build goals on. So it's a wealth of information that can be just copied and pasted and put directly into a student's IEP document. And then it will come up with recommended goals that are intact, follow the intact standard in writing transition goals for what each of the participants said, the professional, student, and family.
Jim, can I ask you one question?
Sure.
Brian was asking in the chat, how long does it take for a student to go through the TAG? I said about 30 to 45 minutes, but I don't
Oh,
know.
not nearly that long. If somebody clicks the audio button or the video button, which are the slowest ways to go through, it might take, boy, 10, 15 minutes at the longest. So
Thank you.
thanks, Jennifer. So DCDT, which is the major professional organization in the country, or in the world actually, focused on transition, it has established transition standards that all of us need to follow. And number one on the list is that we use valid and reliable transition assessments. We have to use transitions assessments ongoing. Ongoing is relative to the student. For some students, it might be once a month. For some, it might be every week. For some, it might be every day. For some, it might be annually. It's all based on the needs of the student and the kind of assessments we're doing. We use assessments to identify their interests, skills, and needs. And then we take that information and we interpret it for all of the IEP members, especially families and students. And then, as much as possible, involve students in the entire transition planning process, from picking assessments. How about this? Go to the next IEP meeting and have the student describe the results of their transition assessments. And then you as the professional can go in afterwards and add in anything the student missed. As an example, it makes these meetings extremely real and extremely personal when that happens. Transition assessments should be developed following the guidelines from the standards for educational and psychological testing, which is kind of it's the professional guidebook for transition developments. And the tag, for instance, was developed following these standards, as were some of the other ones. So when you look at an assessment, you want to make sure at its basic level, you understand these things, like what is the purpose of this assessment? Who was it designed for? Was it designed for adolescents with disabilities, or was it designed for kids in foster care, or for all kids in foster care? Or was it designed for adults that had some kind of physical or war-related disability? Where did the items come from? Did I just make it up over lunch one day, or was having a cup of coffee in the teacher's lounge? Do ample evidence exist for reliability, test retests, no bias? And what about outcomes? If there's one thing that we ought to be concerned with, and that is the predictive validity of these tests. Do these tests actually end up predicting what someone's going to do when they're out of school? The self-determination tests, by the way, and the tag all have, some of the self-determination assessments have predictive validity. So we need to do transition assessments for employment, for education and training, and independent living. The law says it's optional, but sometimes the law is too narrow. If anything, I would say we do assessments to look at living skills, and then based on the results of the assessment, decide if we include those in, or if the student doesn't need those skills, then we focus more on the other two. But let's make that a decision based on a good independent living assessment, rather than just, that's something that other classroom does. We don't do those here. Transition assessment does a really good idea too of taking the fluff out of post-secondary goals. When we look at skill assessments and transition interest assessments and skill assessments, as somebody goes through high school, we could even back this up into middle school if we wanted to. Oftentimes, the post-secondary goals especially will have a lot of fluff in them. I want to be a NASCAR driver. And I don't even know if I'm going to get my driver's license, let alone drive NASCAR. I don't know if you need driver's license for NASCAR, so probably not a good example, but I think it gets a point across. So we have a lot of fluff sometimes, but through the transition assessment results, ideally, as by the time somebody gets ready to move from high school to life after high school, we have a firm match about and things are set up for them to go to some kind of post-secondary education, whether it be apprenticeship, whether it be on-the-job training, whether it be a career tech program, whether it be Harvard, whatever it is, and or a job where somebody's going to live. Have all those things together by the time they leave school, and transition assessments help with that. We have interest assessments, we have skill assessments, and then we use these results to make informed choices, identify needed skills, give students and their family members lots of opportunities to become involved, and students and families can learn together the skills students need to learn now to increase their likelihood of success after school, and sets up opportunities perhaps to families to think of, now how can I teach some of these things at home too? Another assessment that I like a lot, as far as I know, it doesn't really have any career assessment, any validity, reliability data supporting it, not that I've ever been able to find. But a lot of people like it, especially as for freshmen, maybe 8th graders, freshmen, sophomores, as they start narrowing down what they're going to be doing after school. My wife used to use this when she was teaching kids with emotional behavior problems. And she would give them this assessment, and at the beginning of the year, well, what do you want to do when you're out of school? Well, I don't know. I want to sell drugs. I don't know. She would then have them all do either the online or paper pencil career tech assessment and the career clusters assessment. When that was done, they all had top clusters that they were interested in, and then they would go explore those particular clusters and then do a presentation to the class on what they learned about this particular career cluster. So it's a great way to begin conversations, and it can feed into a lot of great career exploration ideas and programs. Here's what it looks like. It's really easy to do. You just go through and students circle what they like. School subjects I like. I like agriculture. I love nature. I love solving problems. I love to hunt and fish. I want to protect the environment. And all you do is count up the number of circles, put that, you don't add the numbers. You don't add 3 plus 3 plus, you don't do that. Just add up the number of circles and put the total number of circles in the box. And then at the end, you look at what boxes were circled the most, and then it lines up with one of these 16 career clusters, which match really well with the Department of Labor clusters of all the jobs in the country. And career tech centers, most career tech centers line up their programs based upon these career clusters also. Another great source for career exploration is the Career One Stop and their videos. They have wonderful career videos. They're oftentimes a couple minutes long. They're open caption. They sample jobs across all their career clusters. You can also get them in Spanish. You can also look at them by skill and ability, all sorts of cool things here. Would you like to, here's a screenshot of one of the videos of someone who works in an ambulance, an EMT person. Would you like to see one of these videos? Got one right here.
Das hier ist mein Sektor. Das hier ist das wichtigste Gerät des Küstenwächters. Das Gerät, das Überlebensradar.
Mayday, mayday. Hello, can you hear us? Can you hear us? Can you... Over. We are sinking. We are sinking.
Hello? This is the German Coast Guard.
We are sinking. We're sinking.
What are you thinking about
Anyway, I like that video. I hope you got a chuckle out of it. There's a guide for assessing college readiness. This is what it looks like: academic skills, self-understanding. This is specifically useful for students who think they want to go to a post-secondary ed program, a typical 2-4 year academic college. They start completing this when they're a freshman, maybe in 8th grade. Think about what it really takes for me to get there. Employability life skill assessment is one I really liked a lot. This one is done by ages. You can Google all of these. These are all informal assessments. Life skill inventory is another one. It's free. Once again, it's an informal inventory. A lot of students, a lot of educators like these, the Enderly Severson transition rating scale. They have them for students with mild disabilities, more disabilities, severe multiple disabilities. Fairly inexpensive. They have online versions now also. This is kind of what the results you get from the J version, which is for the one students with disabilities. Unfortunately, they don't really have many questions for students. It's basically completed by teachers or parents. Casey Life Skill is a really cool life skill inventory. It's online, really well done by different age levels, functioning levels. But once again, no validity, reliability information to support it. You can see here's some of this is part of what you get in your results profile. Well, all are the following questions like me? No, mostly. And then they take these, summarize them to give you the results. For those of you who work with students with more significant support needs, this is a great one, personal preference indicators. And there's a vocational preference indicator one as well. And these you can get at the University of Oklahoma's Zero Center website at no cost. And it's especially for those students where you're tired of getting very, very low scores with your assessment. And here you come up with a more positive oriented ways of looking at assessments. Looks at individual indicators. What are my favorites? What is a student? What calms the student? And so forth. So big idea number 2. We have to write post-secondary goals. And we want students to answer this question, is where do I want to live after leaving school? Where do I want to work after leaving high school? And where do I want to learn after leaving high school? And the answers to those things become their post-secondary goals. And ideally, those ought to change over time. As students do more assessments, they involved in the career education process, they look at what training it takes to get the jobs they want. They look at the different jobs there are, they explore options. We really expect the post-school goals to change over time, and they probably should. And we know from one study I know of that was done a while ago, that when students leave high school, very seldom do they end up matching up with what their goals were in high school. So that's not the important part. It's the process is what's important. We want to teach students a process they can generalize into the future. Now, to me, the power is with these, the annual transition goals. We look at the strengths and needs, and we want students to answer these questions. What do I need to learn now to live where I want, to work where I want, to learn where I want after high school? And these become their annual transition goals. And not all skills are created equal. And it's a time to focus on skills that we know produce generalizable results. Because when students learn certain skills, it's much more likely to predict better post-school outcomes. Like the tag, for instance, is only based on behaviors and experiences that we know are associated or predict better post-school outcomes. So when we teach students those skills, as opposed to what we kind of random willy-nilly pick up. If we focus on specific skills we know the research tells us will most likely make a difference, well, let's teach those skills rather than something else. So big idea number 4 is we need to create a course of study. What are the students going to do to get to where they want to go? So we look at their strengths or need, their interests, what classes, what school activities, what extracurricular activities, what kind of community activities do I need to do to help me get to where I want to go? And I think we need to expand. This not idea, just my own personal thoughts. If I was teaching high school right now, I would do a course of study that would, of course, have the classes students have to take, but I would expand that to include extracurricular activities and what are some things in the broader community that I could do to help me get to where I really want to go. And answers to those issues becomes the course of study. Big idea number 5, we want students to answer this question. What do I need to do to attain my annual transition goals? And put into this context, coordinated activities all of a sudden, to me anyway, becomes real understandable. It's what students are going to do to help them achieve their annual transition goal. And then these answers become the coordinated services. I might have to go meet with my rehab counselor to help with post-education, post-school education. Or I might have to go work at a part-time job this summer at maybe an auto body repair shop. So I can see if I really want to be an auto body mechanic when I get out of school, to help get some of those experiences that might help me get into the Career Tech Auto Body Career Program. Those kind of things are the coordinated services that we use to help accomplish our annual transition goals. And what's cool about these aren't things that educators necessarily have to teach. They can be implemented by friends, by family members, by community people. They could even be taught by independent living center staff if you're lucky enough to have an independent living center near you. But it's these kind of opportunities that we want to link to what students need to do to help them attain their post-school goals. Of course, we've got to focus on post-school linkages along with this. And that are those groups that are going to support people to make it from high school to life after high school. Might be a job coach. It might be through a supportive employment program. It might be a disability resource center counselor to get hooked up for adults' ongoing services. It might be talking to the intake person at the local career technology center. For students who have medical needs, talking to medical assistant providers about how I can make my colostomy work for me when I get a job somewhere, and then try that out through some school programs, or whatever the issues are. We need to think about what post-school linkages we need to help students hook up with to make all this happen. Big idea number 6, we're getting close to big idea number 8. Big idea number 6 is we gotta get kids actively engaged in their IEP and transition planning process. We know now that when students and districts have more students engaged and actively involved in their IEP meeting, not just sitting there being invited and attending, but sitting at the head and symbolically leading their meeting, those activities not only promote better in-school productivity, but better post-school outcomes. Looks like this. Think for a second. At the typical teacher-directed IEP meeting, what % of time does the special ed teacher talk? Just write something in the chat box. What % of time does the administrator typically talk? What % of time does the student talk What percent of time does a student typically talk? 2%, very little, 0, yeah. All that can change. That can all change. If because what we found, we went around and sat in, and this is really a fun study to do, observed lots of IEP meetings, and we kept track every 10 seconds of who talked and what they talked about. And what we found out was these were all they were all secondary, some middle school, as well as high school, kids all of transition age. And we found special ed teachers talked 50% of the time, family members 15%, administrators 9%, students talked 4% of the time. And that was almost always in response to a direct question, and very seldom was it more than a sentence or two. So clearly, adults talk to adults, and the student is kind of asked occasionally to participate. So whose meeting is this? Is it really the student's meeting? The data suggests it's the meeting for adults to talk about the student. And when we get to talk about transition, look at this. Almost the same special ed teachers talked 50% of the time when transition was talked, family members 8%, support staff. This was when there was a representative from the Career Tech Center or the rehab counselor came in. They really got the student involved in talking about their transition future. So they increased more when it came to transition, primarily because the support staff pulled it out of the student, which is interesting. But it's still adults talking to adults. The spirit of ID is this, that students have to be invited to attend their IEP meeting when they talk. But what that means is that students have to be taught the language, they have to be taught their role, what to do, and then they're prepared to become actively involved in their IEP meeting when they get there. Just having students come, sit at their IEP meeting, most students don't like it. They don't enjoy being there. They wish they were anywhere else. It's almost to the point, one of our colleagues called that academic abuse when we do that to students without preparing them ahead of time what to do. Fortunately, there are materials, and these are good evidence-based practice. All of these INSTAC has deemed as evidence-based practice, which is the highest level of practice you can get. These are all also available for free to download at the OU Zero Center website, self-directed IEP, student-directed transition planning. Well, student-directed transition planning, that's not an evidence-based practice. That's one that's an emerging practice. I take that back. Whose future is in any way is an evidence-based practice, as is the self-advocacy strategy. That one you have to buy from the University of Kansas's, just Google it, self-advocacy strategy. And I'm determined, a great website, all kinds of great material and videos. Unfortunately, last time I looked at it, which was just about a month ago, they didn't have any evidence supporting any of their materials yet. I hope that will change in the future. We want to, at the minimum, we want students to come in and do these things. Hi, this is my meeting. Introduce the team. State what their goals are. They want them to deal with differences of opinion. This is kind of like trend. This is like IEP involvement 101. Once they do this, then we want them to become more involved and to talk more about their goals, talk more about their transition assessment results, what their plans are for the future. Big idea number 7 is we've got to teach self-determination skills. Throughout the tag, it's a set of critical self-determination skills. We looked at self-determination assessments, and there's several really good lesson packages to help teach self-determination skills. And all of these are available at no cost. You can get several of these at the Zero Center website. SDLMI, It's a process that you can learn. Just Google SDLMI and you'll find ways to teach that as well. And I believe NTAC has lesson plans to teach many of these also on the website. So big idea number 8, and the last idea, and time after time after time after time, studies have found that when our students have paid jobs in high school, it predicts having paid job after high school. Summer jobs, part-time jobs, community-based supported employment. We don't know, there's mixed results if it's work experience, non-paid work experience. Some studies have found that it does predict better outcomes, some haven't. But the one thing we know for sure is when students have a paid job, they're actually working for a boss. That's a predictor. So we need to work as much as possible to help our students to get a paid job during their high school experiences. So big ideas, overall transition covered. Questions or thoughts that Jennifer and I can answer? What you think? It was very informative. Love this. Thank you. Well, you are welcome, Quinn. Great information and resources. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You'll use them? Excellent. We'll be passing on to others. Well, good. Well, Jennifer, it doesn't look like there's any other questions.
Nope, I've been getting some questions in the question and answer box, but those were about if the webinar would be available, and that will definitely be available after we have it captioned, and we'll be sending that out along with other information and some links. People were wondering if there would be links to the resources, and that would be something that we'd be able to do as well. So we'll get you all of that information probably next week.
Wonderful.
Yeah, so if there aren't, there is a question there from Lavinia. Hi, Lavinia. Where does it say in the law that formal assessments are needed for transition?
That is not said in the law. That has been stated in some Southeastern District Court findings. Due process cases, once they go to school and it continues on, it goes to federal district court. And that I pulled out of an article by Prince et al. In 2014. Send me an email and I'll send you a copy of that article. But what the district courts, what their summary is of the district court findings, the courts are saying we need to use at least one formal assessment, meaning an assessment that has ample supporting validity and reliability information as a part of our transition assessment battery. So does that help, Lavinia? Lavinia?
Jim, are you okay if I put your email in the chat?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
And it's also right here.
Oh, great. So the information, we'll probably send it out through our listserv, and also if you registered for the webinar, we'll have your emails through that. And so we'll just make sure, it probably would be by the end of next week by the time the captioning came through. So you can expect something by the end of next week with all the information.
It certainly has been great being with you all this afternoon, and more than anything, stay healthy. My daughter, my physician daughter, has grounded my wife and I to her house because I have respiratory issues, and she says, Dad, you are in the highest of the high-risk group, so stay home. It kind of reminded me when she was a kid. And I would have to tell her, now be home by 10 o'clock on Saturday night. And now the tables have turned.
I love it. Yes, thank you all for being here today and for your great questions, and stay healthy and check out our website often because we'll be posting things up there as we move forward. So have a great day, and we'll be in touch. Thank you, everybody.
Bye, everybody.